Hello, and today we're going to be discussing water, which is amazing chemically as well as what it does in the body. So, let's discuss some characteristics of water. Water itself is more essential than any other nutrient. So like we had mentioned before, the term essential means we need it in our diet or we need to consume it or else we'll have health problems. Obviously, we need minerals to help aid in that water balance. However, having the appropriate amount of water is critical to life. The human body weight is roughly 50 to 70% made up of water, and we've got so many different tasks that this water does in our body. For example, lubricates and supports tissues and joints. It helps regulate body temperature through thermoregulation. And just think about it. Your body's temperature is like 98.6. If you had a fever that spiked, people say, oh, I have a fever of 100. Like that's literally less than 2 degrees difference. So water is very effective at thermoregulation. To put it in perspective, if you're wandering around, hiking, or just living your life, we can only survive, again, 3 to maybe 10 days without consuming additional water. So make sure that you hydrate. Lack of water, like I said, causes this dehydration, which can have very adverse effects on your health, including, like we mentioned, death. And water is also a universal solvent, which allows for many items to dissolve in it. And we're going to discuss this in more detail as we continue on. And it may seem strange to discuss the history of water, but it is kind of interesting to think about. New research finds that the Earth's water came from asteroids and the clouds of dust and gas after the sun's formation. The earliest humans and animals all needed water. This was a necessity to survive, but many did not drink it out of risk for becoming ill. And you may say, that seems very strange. But think about it. If you're going to drink from contaminated water, then you might have diarrhea and vomiting, which would make you even more dehydrated. However, you can consume foods that actually have water in them as well. So fruits, vegetables, all of those have been filtered by nature to be safe. And water is a very important public health concern. Clean water means less disease. The main source of water over the years, again, groundwater, mainly springs and wells were used, and water was and is still used for agriculture and livestock. When we're discussing good water, water quality is a term that is talked about. In ancient times, the quality of water that came out of the earth or that came from a well was measured by what did it smell like? What did it look like? What was its taste? And what was the temperature? So tasteless, odorless, and colorless water that came from the ground was considered the best. Ancient Romans and Greeks used tanks, filters, and even boiled water to keep it fresh and clean throughout their society. But poor waste management can lead to really bad problems like contaminated drinking water. If we're going to use water in cooking, one of the things that water can be used for is actually sterilizing. So we're going to discuss a recipe where we're going to be using sterile jars as well as water in the recipe itself. So if we're using water to sterilize jars, what we want to do is we're going to heat the water very, very hot, and we're going to use that water to pre-sterilize the jars themselves. It comes down to the science of it. If you think about it, we want to make sure that those bacteria and other microbes are compromised or killed off completely. So we want to submerge the items into boiling water to kill off those microbes. And we want to do it for 10 or more minutes. So let's discuss jellies. If you're making something like a strawberry jelly, that canning process is shorter than the 10-minute window to kill all the microbes. Thus, if the canning product, like a jam or a jelly, does not allow for 10 or more minutes under pressure to kill those microbes, the chef should think about pre-sterilizing those jars. So if we're sterilizing the mason jars, those glass jars with the lids that you classically think of with old American canning, what we're going to need is we need the jars themselves, a large pot with a lid, a canning rack or any other type of rack that fits inside the pot that's made of metal, a saucepan, tongs, and a kitchen towel. What we're going to do first is wash the jars, the lids, and the bands in hot soapy water. Rinse those, and then once they're rinsed, Put the rack inside the pot and put the jars on top of that rack. Put the lids and bands into a saucepan, so you got a couple things going on at once. Next, fill the pot and the saucepan with water and boil the pot for 10 minutes and simmer until you're going to be getting those things out or using it. Then we have you simmering the saucepan with the lids and bands and have those simmering until you're about to use them as well. Then remove the jars from the pot just before filling, and you're going to use the tongs to remove those from the pot because you don't want to burn your hands, number one, and you don't want to contaminate them, number two. So the tongs themselves should be, again, a metal set of tongs that they themselves have been sterilized. Then what we're going to do is shake the excess water, transfer to a clean kitchen towel, and have them ready to put things in. And strawberry jam might be something that you put into those mason jars. And to make the strawberry jam, we want 2 pounds of fresh strawberries, and we're going to have them hulled. And you can see the picture in the upper left-hand corner there. Those strawberries are hulled, the ones that are closest to the front, meaning that they've had the green tops cut off. We also have 4 cups of white sugar and a 1/4 cup of lemon juice, which are all a component of this recipe. We want to crush the strawberries in batches using a potato masher or a fork, and then we're going to create this lumpy mixture. We don't want to blend it or puree it because we do want some consistency to our jam. We want a little bite to it. So in a saucepan, combine all the ingredients, the strawberries, the sugar, the lemon juice, and stir it over low heat until the sugar is dissolved. Then what you're going to do is continue cooking on high heat while stirring continuously until the mixture itself is boiling. Did you know? The U.S. produces about 1 billion pounds of fruit spreads yearly. So clearly, this is something that we like to eat. Next, when we're talking about the strawberry jam, we're discussing the time and temperature. Using a thermometer, measure the temperature of the mixture. Once it reaches 220 degrees Fahrenheit, turn off the heat. Pour the mixture into the hot, sterile mason jars and put the lids on it and seal them. Refrigerate them when they're not in use. So let's review the strawberry jam recipe. What is the science behind it? Well, what's the purpose of adding sugar aside from making the jam taste delicious? Well, the sugar acts as a preservative for the jam by drawing water from the strawberry itself, and the sugar molecule will bind with that water molecule, decreasing microorganism growth. Why should we sterilize the mason jars? Like we mentioned before, the jar is sterilized to kill microorganisms on and inside that jar itself. Additionally, the strawberry jam has a water activity of 0.83 and 31% moisture. This is considered a food that is prone to spoilage. So if we're sterilizing the mason jars prior to canning, this actually prolongs the shelf life of the jam, making it safe for a longer period of time. Next, let's discuss strawberry roll-ups. And you may notice the ingredients are almost identical to the strawberry jam. We have strawberries, lemon juice, and sugar. But the strawberry roll-ups have a different water activity, so let's discuss how that happens. We're going to take and blend the strawberries in a blender or a food processor until they're completely smooth. So this is different than our jam recipe. So we want this one smooth, smooth, smooth. Then in a saucepan, we're combining those blended and pureed strawberries, the lemon juice, and the sugar. In medium-high heat, cook for 10 minutes or until the mixture is thick and has a jam-like consistency. You're going to preheat the oven to a very low temperature, 170 degrees Fahrenheit. Then we're going to line a baking tray with parchment paper. Spread the mixture evenly onto the tray, about 1/8 of an inch thick. So again, a very thin layer. And a little question, did you know the fruit roll-up brand was founded in 1983? The ones we're making, these strawberry roll-ups, are going to be homemade versions of that classic treat that people have in their lunch boxes. As we continue making the strawberry roll-ups, let's talk about the baking. We're going to bake them at that low temperature for 3 to 4 hours. And the reason we're baking them is to get water out. And we want to bake until the mixture is no longer sticky. Remove it from the oven and let it cool. Then what we want you to do is transfer to a cooking board lined with wax paper. And so we transfer it onto that, and we're going to be cutting it into long strips. Then, after we have the fruit roll-up on that paper, we're going to roll them up and make our own homemade roll-ups. So let's review the homemade strawberry roll-up recipe. What is the science behind it? For example, why is the mixture boiled before it's baked? Seems redundant, but actually the mixture is boiled to remove some of the water. By removing the water, the mixture becomes thicker, allowing for easier spreading on the baking tray and allowing us to get that classic 1/8 of an inch. Why is it baked under low temperature? Well, the purpose is not to necessarily cook the strawberry mixture. Rather, what we're doing is we're removing some of the water, making the consistency a little stiffer and easier to roll. Just a comparison between this and the jam, the strawberry roll-ups have 12% moisture content. So again, close to 1/3 or so of what we might see in that strawberry jam. Strawberry roll-ups have a water activity around 0.5. So it is going to be something that is a lot more shelf stable than that strawberry jam itself. So let's discuss it a little bit more. Respectfully, with regard to the water activity, what's the difference between the strawberry jam versus the strawberry roll-ups? Like we mentioned, both recipes use the same ingredients, just with different amounts and different cooking steps. The strawberry jam is lumpy and spreadable, while the strawberry roll-ups are a solid. What causes the difference? Well, cooking causes the water activity and water content to decrease. The reason is because the cooking causes the water inside the strawberries to evaporate. That's why. So the fresh strawberries, not cooked, have a water activity of 0.98 with a moisture content of 90%. Very high moisture food product. Then we have strawberry jam, which is boiled until it reaches 220 degrees Fahrenheit and has a water activity of 0.83 and 31% moisture content. And lastly, in comparison, the strawberry roll-ups are boiled and then baked for several hours and have a water activity of 0.5 with 12% moisture content. So as you can see, fresh strawberries, even if kept in the refrigerator, would have a shorter shelf life than the strawberry jam, which would have a shorter shelf life comparatively to strawberry roll-ups if we kept them in that same refrigerator. So let's discuss water. I know it may seem silly to discuss the nutrient components of water, but let's talk about components of plain water, artisanal water, or water in other food products. So water itself has no calories. There aren't any carbohydrates, fats, protein, there's no alcohol in there, so there isn't anything to be broken down for ATP. With water that we get from the tap or from other sources, it can contain trace amounts of minerals like calcium, magnesium, sodium, zinc, and copper. Tap water additionally has fluoride added to it to reduce the incidence of tooth decay or dental caries. In comparison, we have some artisanal waters. Some of them are carbonated waters like this bubbly. It contains carbonic acid, and sometimes there might be an artificial sweetener or a little bit of a natural sweetener. Other times, not as much. There are some fruit-flavored waters as well, and some of the fruit-flavored waters even have some vitamins and minerals that are coming from the fruit content. They might have been leached out a little bit, including something like vitamin C. So not every fruit-flavored water does have some of these vitamins and minerals. However, again, if you have fruit that's been soaking in that fruit-flavored water, you might get some benefits. And we also have water in other foods. For example, we have over 90% water in fruits like watermelon, strawberries, and cucumber. Other types of drinks contain a lot of water, like milk, coffee, and tea. And we even have vegetables like cabbage, cauliflower, and spinach, which have a lot of water in them. So if you're looking to hydrate, don't just think about plain water. You can hydrate with your foodstuffs as well. So let's discuss the chemistry of water. And water is fascinating with the chemistry, at least for me. Water is considered what we call a dipolar molecule. This means that the molecule structure of water is non-symmetrical. We've got more electrons on one side versus the other, which gives water this bent shape because we have electron placement heavy on one side and then we have the hydrogens on the other. So we have these free or unbound electrons, which allow for the water to have a charge itself. Because it has one side that's more positive and one side that's more negative, it actually makes for a really nice solvent. In fact, we refer to water as the universal solvent. If you recall, a solvent is a liquid substance that dissolves other substances. So water is called this universal solvent because it dissolves lots of substances, sugars, minerals, lots of things in there. Even, again, amino acids can dissolve in water. So water molecules surround other molecules a lot of times, dispersing them into a solution. So water is something that absolutely can be used to dissolve other things into it. Examples of things that might be a little insoluble in water are things like nitrogen gas, waxes, or lipids. But for the most part, we're not too worried about those being in our water. At this time, what I want you to do is take a moment to watch this video discussing solute versus solvents and answer the following questions. Can you define what a solute is after watching this video? Can you define a solvent? Can you compare the definitions of mixture versus solution? What happens when alcohol is used as a solvent? Like for example, if we have something that has alcohol as a solvent that we're rubbing on our hands versus something that has water as a solvent that we're rubbing on our hands, what happens differently? Why does water's polarity help with its role as a solvent? And what do we use water for in our life? What I want you to do is watch this video before continuing. There is a lot of water in the body. The human body is made of about 60% water, and the more heavily muscled you are, the more water you would have in the body. The more adiposity or fat tissue you have, the less water you have in the body. But in reality, we've got a lot of water that is making up things such as our brain and heart at 73% of the weight as water, lungs at 83%, skin at 64%. Muscles and kidneys at 79%. And even though you may think of the bones as being mostly minerals, 31% of your bone is actually water. And the water provides so many essential functions in the body. For example, it provides structure for many cells. Additionally, water helps regulate body temperature by sweating, as well as you can bring blood to the surface of our skin for radiant heat loss. Carbohydrates and proteins are transported in the bloodstream using water. Water can help flush waste through urination. Water helps form saliva. And water even lubricates our joints. And this is just a short list. Water can help with many other things. When we discuss the many roles of water, something that's kind of interesting that comes up is this cinnamon challenge that was hot many years ago. First of all, don't do it. Do not do the cinnamon challenge. I'm showing you a video or having you watch a video so that you can better understand why this happens. So cinnamon itself is not really that soluble in water, but as you watch the video, I want you to think about this. Why can't individuals easily swallow the cinnamon? What does this have to do with the digestive system? And you might have to look this one up on your own using a reputable source. What is a bolus? Now, watch the first couple of minutes of the video, answer the questions to the best of your ability, and then move forward with the lecture. So water has many roles in the digestive system. For example, in the mouth, water is a major component of saliva. Water helps moisten food, helps us to chew and get everything mixed together, as well as create a bolus that we're able to swallow. That bolus itself moves from the mouth down the esophagus into the stomach. And water consumption is going to dilute that digesta that's in the stomach, often referred to as chyme. And even though it's diluting that chyme, it's still allowing the stomach to assist in digestion. Additionally, the stomach itself has a major role of digesting protein, and we don't want it to digest itself because the stomach is made of muscle or made of a lot of protein. So water itself helps form a mucus, which protects the inside of the stomach so the stomach doesn't actually digest itself. In the intestines, like the small intestine, the large intestine, the water allows soluble fiber to form that gelatinous material, allowing for more bulk. Additionally, water is absorbed from the small and large intestine, allowing for proper hydration. When we're absorbing water, we do this because water is essential for homeostasis and hydration of the body. We also oftentimes are absorbing water along with minerals. The minerals in the form of electrolytes help with water balance. So things like potassium, magnesium, calcium, sodium, chloride are all going to play a major role with regard to water retention. We have fluid exchange mechanisms between the blood and tissues, which we will discuss in a little while. And so we have fluid that goes from outside the cell to inside the cell, and so we have fluid that's going to be exchanged across cell walls. Additionally, we have fluid that's in the bloodstream that can leave capillaries and then also re-enter capillaries, going in and out of that blood as well. With regard to fluid exchange, we have a couple things that are going to play a role with how much fluid leaves that capillary bed or comes back into that capillary bed. One thing that's going to allow for some pressure is hydrostatic or systemic blood pressure. So the heart, when it beats, actually pushes fluid out of the capillary beds in the area of the capillary bed that is closer to the heart itself. And so that water pushing on the walls of the cells or vessels is going to, again, push fluid out of those systems. We don't want all the fluid to leave the capillary bed though, so we want to pull some of it back in at the end of the capillary bed that is closer to the end of that whole entire transit. So it's going to be further away from the heart itself. So we have osmotic or colloid osmotic pressure, which is going to pull fluid back into that capillary bed itself. Things that are going to allow for more pull are things that are solutes that are dissolved in the water. The solute that's dissolved in the water in large concentration in the blood is albumin, which is a blood protein. At this time, what I want you to do is watch a video on capillary fluid exchange and answer the following questions. For example, are capillaries permeable to solutes and water? Explain. What is too large to pass through that capillary wall? Define hydrostatic pressure and how it impacts fluid flow at the capillaries. Then define osmotic pressure and explain how it impacts fluid flow at the capillaries. Which end of the vessel does fluid move out of the blood? How about which end of the vessel does fluid move into the blood? What solutes are there in blood? And what is the role of the lymph system in water movement? So answer all these questions on your own while you're watching the video, and then continue on for more learning. One of the terms that we want you to understand with regard to water is osmosis. And osmosis is when water molecules diffuse across a semipermeable membrane to a higher solute concentration. Remember, items move from high to low concentration, meaning water is going to move from an area where there's a lot of water to an area where there is less water. So things go from, again, areas where it's more dilute, lots of water, to an area where there are more solutes in that solution. So it's going to be moving towards the sugars, the proteins, the minerals, things like that. So we have the term osmotic pressure. And osmotic pressure is a way of explaining that the more of a solute that we have dissolved, the more osmotic pressure is exerted. So the more proteins you have in your bloodstream, the more those proteins will pull fluid into that blood from that space between cells. We also have a term that's called a colloid osmosis or osmotic pressure. And this is when osmotic pressure is exerted by a large molecule, which can serve to hold water within a space. So for example, like I mentioned, we have albumin, which is a protein that provides colloid osmosis or colloid osmotic pressure to pull fluid back into that bloodstream. So we don't get a lot of edema or swelling. So can you get too much of a good thing? Well, you can. Although water plays a vital role in our bodies and we can't survive for more than a few days without it, definitely we can have too much. Just like too little is fatal, too much water is fatal as well. We can have a situation where if we're consuming a large amount of water in a short period of time, that you can actually come down with what we call water intoxication. And with that water intoxication, the kidneys cannot rid the body of the water as it is being consumed and diluting out the bloodstream. It can't do it fast enough. So too much water, the kidneys can't keep up. So if the kidneys are processing slowly 15 liters a day of filtrate, if we consume like a big old gallon of water or 2 gallons of water in a short period of time, it could actually cause death. So please don't take on any dares where someone dares you to drink as much water as possible in a short period of time. It could cause fatal results. So like we mentioned, a large bolus of water can cause some major issues. What are some symptoms of water intoxication? Well, one of the symptoms is that you start having problems with your body functioning, because after the maximum amount of water that the kidneys can process has been passed up in that time window, we start having things like, again, your brain isn't functioning as well because it's swelling. So ultimately you start having cognitive issues. We can also have things that are going to be causing issues with muscles cramping. We have a lot of problems. So like I said, if we are over consuming water, The brain tissue is going to swell, not going to function as well. We also have things like a headache that comes on, changes in behavior. We can have muscle cramping, nausea, twitching of the muscles, muscle weakness, vomiting, confusion, irritability, drowsiness, and like we mentioned, possibly even death. And the main cause for excessive water intake are things like a dare. I dare you to drink as much water as you possibly can. Or we can have a situation like a psychiatric disorder, such as schizophrenia, or even something like anorexia nervosa, where someone is, again, over-consuming and then having some issues with water balance. Kind of an interesting and a little bit scary situation is this aquagenic urticaria pruritus. And with this is a rare allergy towards water, where an individual, if they get on their skin, they actually have the equivalent of an allergic reaction. It's very painful, it's itchy, and so even with water consumption, bathing, and sweating, as well as other environmental influences, it can be a trigger. The condition requires a combination of lifestyle changes and allergy medication. And even though water is the most essential nutrient, there can be situations where someone is hospitalized. Let's talk about this. So, like we had mentioned earlier in the reading and information, we don't want to overconsume water. An example of a situation where someone was dared or bet that they could consume a lot of water in a short period of time was this Hold Your Wee for a Wee contest. So several years ago, there was a radio disc jockey who had a contest where individuals would have to drink as much water as possible in a short period of time. And if they held their urine and did not go to the bathroom while consuming all of that water, then they were able to win this Wii gaming system. Well, a mother did win the Wii gaming system, but she actually had water intoxication. Her brain swelled. She had complications and she actually ended up passing away. So this is something where we don't want to repeat this. We don't want another woman dying after extreme water consumption without relief. Water intoxication causes the balance between electrolytes and water to be disrupted, and it causes so many issues with neurological conditions and muscle. We can also have situations where people are hospitalized due to water contamination. So water can easily be contaminated by bacteria and other harmful substances, and those microorganisms can cause death if left untreated. There's also situations where we can have water contamination by toxins. So in Flint, Michigan, there's an extreme situation that occurred, and we're still resolving it to this day with regard to the water safety being compromised in a whole entire area. 12 people were killed by the contaminated water in Flint, and 90 people received severe illness from that water itself. At this time, what I want you to do is watch the video discussing the Flint, Michigan water crisis. Although this video is from 2016, it may seem a little outdated. It very definitely shows in a short period of time the importance of not cutting corners when we're talking about water safety and providing it to children all the way up to the elderly populations. In emergency situations, we want to make sure that you have enough water. And you may say, well, how much water should I have? Well, you should aim to store about 1 gallon of water per person in your household. Replace the non-store-bought water every 6 months. So if you put it in your own container, then make sure that you are replacing it. We want to choose a container that has a top that can be closed very, very tightly. Also, the container itself should be durable. We should have a narrow opening or neck for easy pouring. An unopened commercially bottled water is the safest and most reliable source of water in an emergency itself. And like I said, it can sometimes have a much longer shelf life, allowing you to have that needed water per the individuals in your household. And don't forget about your pets as well. It seems almost comical to discuss the moisture content and water activity of water. But I do want to bring this up because it shows you the calculations that we've been using to discuss that water activity. So pure water has 100% moisture content. You might say, how do we calculate that, Tony? Well, we can take the moisture content by figuring out the weight minus the weight after drying, and then that difference divided by the weight times 100. So you can imagine that if we have pure water and then we dry it, we have nothing. And then we divide it by the weight of the pure water, multiply it by 100, and ultimately we have pure water with 100% moisture content. The water activity of pure water is also 1. And this is calculated by looking at the vapor pressure of the food or the water divided by the vapor pressure of the water, which means that the water activity is going to be 1. Microbes themselves do like to make sure that they're in environments where we have a little bit of moisture, a little bit of water activity. So globally, 2 billion people drink water that actually has harmful bacteria in them. Those microbes are in there, possibly even microbes that are found in feces. There are 7 harmful bacteria that are present in select water that is consumed. For example, E. coli, Campylobacter, and beyond. Testing public water systems for bacteria and E. coli is required by both the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency as well as other organizations locally. But we want to let you know that there are ways to remove the bacteria from water. For example, we can use chlorine. We can use UV disinfection, ozonation, boiling, and also microfilters. Keep in mind that not all filters remove bacteria or viruses, so you need to look at the safety considerations for the filters that you purchase. So, for example, Brita filters do remove things like asbestos, lead, benzene, copper, etc., but they're changing like the taste and odor of the water. They're also taking out some of these toxins that are in water itself. However, they might not be getting rid of bacteria or other microorganisms. With reverse osmosis, and if you're using that as a water filtration system, that actually can remove harmful bacteria though. And to put it in perspective, the filter's pore size is going to let you know, hey, is it effective in removing those harmful bacteria? So a very, very small pore size, keep in mind, means very, very slow filtering. And with regard to water, there are even some new products on the market. So here we have boxed water. This is 100% purified water, no added minerals, and it's boxed and shipped in recyclable paper containers. Consumers are trending more towards this sustainable product, and they want to be mindful of their carbon footprint. Like other water, this boxed water has no calories or macronutrients. And Boxed Water, as a company, is promoting high sustainability and environmental protection as a selling feature. So let's discuss the future of water. There are some concerns for the future. For example, water quality has reached a point of uncertainty. We have increased instances of drought and floods, which can cause problems with our water. And we have unpredictable and more extreme weather that's leading to poor water distribution. Currently, we don't have the best global water infrastructure. So some solutions to those problems are to diversify water sources, to have better water regulation globally, and for us to have smarter use of water in our homes. So if you have any questions on this topic, feel free to stop in the virtual tutoring center or send me an email. We're here for you.